Okay, I feel better after that. That was very therapeutic. I needed that. Thank you for letting me indulge, gang. All right, moving right along, because there are other things to talk about in the wild world besides YouTube pulling one of my videos because it pushed the envelope a little too far. Does the name Ryan T. Anderson strike a bell with anyone? I mean, if it doesn't, then don't beat yourself up over it, because Ryan T. Anderson, I follow him on Twitter. I became aware of Ryan, well, now Dr. Anderson. I guess he earned his PhD just a few years ago. But he came to my attention because he, along with new natural law philosopher Robert P. George and Sharif Girgas, they all co-authored a book that was published back in 2012 entitled What is Marriage? Man and Woman, a Defense. It was a very philosophical work. And that came actually at the beginning of sort of my political reawakening. You might say that the 2000 presidential election was my quote-unquote political awakening, and then I went off to college and kind of flirted with leftism, kind of then just got tired of the whole politics thing, thinking, oh, that's below me. I'm far too busy and important to talk about that. And then around 2012, I had this political reawakening, opened my eyes and thought, oh my God, what is actually happening right in front of my eyes? Which is when I started trying to find people, find resources, etc., etc. So that's Ryan T. Anderson. He's a very methodical, very logical man. He is also a doctor in philosophy. Was the editor of the Public Discourse, which is the publishing wing of the Witherspoon Institute. He has moved on to other things. He is now the president of the Ethics and Public Policy Center. And in 2018, this is actually, that was all just background. Here's the real story. In 2018, he wrote a book called When Harry Became Sally, which is, of course, a play on the movie title When Harry Met Sally, which is, FYI, a brilliant comedy from 1989 with a very young Billy Crystal and a very young, very beautiful Meg Ryan, but that's neither here nor there. He wrote a book. This book was called When Harry Became Sally, which was a critique of the transgender ideology. And it wasn't this book, it was not a scurrilous work. It was not an in-your-face sort of angry rant. This is how Sohrab Omari, who is an editor, chief editor, I think, over at the New York Post, this is how he described it, okay? How incendiary is Anderson's book? When Harry Became Sally is a sober and compassionate treatment of an explosive topic. Anderson, the new president of the Ethics and Public Policy Center in Washington, argues that the rash dismantling of the sex binary in the name of transgender rights is scientifically unsound and socially harmful. To make the point, he marshals a mountain of evidence drawn from biology, psychology, medical science, and his own reporting. Anderson is a man who proceeds by cautious reason. Okay, so this book was not inflammatory. This book was not an angry rant. It wasn't anywhere near, okay? In fact, it was the exact antithesis of a book like Mein Kampf, which is a comparison that I make specifically for a specific reason. Well, all that didn't matter to the tech overlords who rule our lives, because earlier this week, on February 21st, Dr. Anderson went onto Twitter and he said this: I hope you've already bought your copy, because Amazon just removed my book When Harry Became Sally, responding to the transgender movement, from their cyber shelves. My other 4 books are still available for now. So yes, Amazon actually removed his book critiquing the transgender ideology. They removed it from hardback, paperback, ebook, or what do they call that? Digital form and audiobook. You just cannot get it. For all intents and purposes, Dr. Anderson's book, When Harry Became Sally, doesn't exist. It never existed. What's even worse is that they didn't even notify him that the book was being taken down. The story is that someone who went on Amazon to try and buy the book couldn't find it anywhere. This person then contacted Dr. Anderson on Twitter and said, hey, you know what? I can't find your book on Amazon. What's going on? And then Anderson did some digging around, and then he was able to say, okay, yeah, Amazon has just removed it. They've memory holed it. And that actually started a trigger. Because, gang, Target then followed suit. You used to be able to get books by, let me see here, Deborah Soh and Abigail Shrier, who have also written books that have critiqued the transgender ideology, that have said, again, these books have not said burn transgender people. These books have made the argument, whether from a biological perspective, an anthropological perspective, a medical perspective, a philosophical perspective, or a combination of those perspectives. They've said, you know what, maybe we shouldn't be going full speed ahead on this. Maybe we should, kind of slow down, kind of get our bearings here. Nothing like this has ever happened in the history of the world before. There's no precedent for this. We, can't actually rely on the wisdom of the past here. Maybe we should slow down. Those books, Target removed their books critiquing the transgender ideology. So I want you actually getting to understand this. We are only a little more than a month removed from the great Twitter purge that happened after the so-called insurrection on January 6th at the Capitol. That's where, 100,000 Twitter accounts at least were erased, blotted out of existence. This is when Amazon, Apple, Google all gave the axe to Parler, the social media platform that was supposed to be the rival of Twitter. In fact, it was created to be the free speech alternative to Twitter. That was all that in January, the great Twitter purge, as I like to call it. Now, just a little more than a month later, and they are already starting to ban books. They're starting to ban books that maybe cut a little too deep into certain aspects of their ideology that they don't want to be looked at. And it's actually really, really interesting too when you think about it. Because, and this was a memory hole. This was a complete and utter memory hole, because Anderson later on Twitter said, I asked Amazon, what gives? What was the reason? What is the reason? Why was this book, after 2 years at the very least? It was published in 2018. I can't remember exactly when. So it's been on Amazon, available on Amazon for at least 2 years. Why exactly was this book removed now? Amazon has never answered. Amazon has never, ever given him an answer. Now, this is scary. They've gone from deleting our digital presence to now actually getting rid of books. They've gone from getting rid of books. And I made a comparison to Mein Kampf just a few minutes ago, specifically because on Amazon, you can still buy copies of Mein Kampf, which was Hitler's political treatise. You can actually, on Amazon, you can still buy, I saw this just the other day, someone posted it on Twitter again, you can actually buy little figures of Hitler where he's giving the Nazi salute. You can buy those on Amazon. But you can't buy Anderson's book. And over at Target, you can't buy Deborah Soh's or Abigail Shrier's book critiquing the transgender ideology. I said in the last video, gang, that we were living in a soft totalitarian system, and this just reinforces it. Now, there are going to be people who say, well, this is perfectly legit because they're private companies, don't you know? And private companies can do They can decide who they host, who they don't host, what products they're going to sell, what products they're going to take down, etc. Blah, 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 blah. In fact, David French, whom we've talked about before here on this channel, was making that exact same move when this all went down. Molly Hemingway over at The Federalist was pointing out the obvious fact, was reminding people that David French, the same man who cheered Twitter as they deplatformed the sitting president of the United States, and who had nothing but good words to say when Amazon, Apple, and Google killed Parler, the very same man who was cheering those acts was now saying, oh, I hope, Amazon, that this is a mistake. I hope it was all just a misunderstanding that you took down Ryan T. Anderson's book. And French, of course, tried to say, well, I mean, this is a complete conflation because, the president was inciting a riot and Parler was allowing hate speech to stay up, and you can critique a private company, but you without actually wanting the government to get involved. This is not a violation of free speech, is what it came down to. Now, forget the fact that we know that Trump was not inciting a riot on January 6th. We've talked about that before, too. Never mind that Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act of 1996 should have actually protected Parler from whatever hate speech was being posted on it, because it says that these social media entities, or actually all these internet entities, are not responsible for third parties posting what they post on them. And even more to the point, we know now that court documents show that there was much more activity in planning the events of January 6th, because this was pre-planned. This was not exactly just a spontaneous movement after being riled by Trump. That's a point that you never hear from the likes of French either. But we now know that there was much more planning going on Facebook than there was on Parler. But Facebook is still up and running. David French hasn't said, my God, Facebook is so dangerous, it needs to be taken down because these people were planning acts of insurrection against the sitting government and planning whatever other deviltry that they were going to do on Facebook. No. It was just on Parler. It was just on Parler that he put into his sites. Forgetting all of that, the idea, this tired old cliche that if a private company does it, then it's all, according to Hoyle, needs to die. Because, okay, gang, it might not technically be a violation of the First Amendment's guarantee of free speech because, yes, Amazon, Apple, Google, they are private entities. They are not the government. And this is the dichotomy. These people, French, Jonah Goldberg, Brad Palumbo, Tiana Lowe, the usual suspects. This is what they always say. Well, the Constitution is only talking about the government. It doesn't say anything about private enterprise. So do you actually want the government to become more powerful by dictating to private companies what can and can't be said, what they can and can't do? You fascist, you black-shirted, Mussolini-backing, boot-licking, goose-stepping tyrant. To which I say baloney, because it's a false dichotomy. Let me repeat. Let me start from the top here. It might not be Amazon taking Ryan T. Anderson's book, just vaporizing it, poof, it never existed on its platform. It might not technically be a violation of the guarantee of free speech that is nestled in the First Amendment, but it is a direct attack against the culture of free speech, against the very idea of free speech, because Amazon, which owns 50% of the booksellers market in the United States, and it's an international conglomerate, by the by. That's an important fact too. Amazon has decided that this particular book, When Harry Became Sally, is not fit to print. No one should be able to read it. The ideas are too dangerous in it. And this is an attack on the culture of free speech. This attack, when an actual, again, let me read to you what Sohrab Omari said about When Harry Became Sally. it is a sober and compassionate treatment of an explosive topic. To make the point, Anderson marshals a mountain of evidence drawn from biology, psychology, medical science, and his own reporting. He is a man who proceeds by cautious reason. So this wasn't, again, a polemical, this wasn't hate speech, this was a serious philosophical and scientific study. The fact that some people agree with it, some people don't, shouldn't enter into the equation. It is a serious work on a serious topic that is right now taking our society and culture by storm, and it is being shoved down everyone's throats, and we are being told to accept this ideology whether we like it or not. Books that seriously look at it, dissect it, question it, ponder it, should absolutely be available so that people can come and they can reason together. Which is what Socrates always said, come, let us reason together. We cannot reason together, and therefore we cannot speak if we are uninformed about one side of the argument. No, but we are being told that there is only one side of the argument, and that is the argument, and that is the side that everyone must accept, and that everyone will accept or be punished. So these companies, memory holding, Anderson's book, Target, memory holding, Soule, and Schreer's books on the same topic, of course they're violations of free speech. Of course they're attacks on free speech. Because by depriving us of these works of research, these serious works of research, by depriving us of the questions that these people ask, the points that they raise, all that we are going to have is what the elites tell us about this subject or any subject. And then that will be the only one that we can actually parrot back. We're not going to have free speech. We're going to be a bunch of mirrors just saying whatever the elites tell us we should say. It's very much, again, gang, I think I've brought this up before, it's very much like the Soviet Constitution of 1936, which actually guaranteed freedom of speech. It was just the speech that the Politburo said was okay. If you actually spoke against the new Soviet man, the Soviet Revolution, Comrade Stalin, or etc., that of course wasn't free speech, because a good Soviet who had been saved by communism wouldn't have said things like that. You needed to be re-educated, which, by the by, is what the gulags in Siberia were for. This is why people like French are wrong, and this is the danger, because if they're going to do this on the transgender ideology, the transgender facet of the left's ideology, they are going to do it on every facet, little by little, inch by inch. They are going to whittle down our capacity to reason and to think and to speak. That's what it gets down to. They're not exactly telling us that we can't talk about this. That's implied. But it cuts even deeper than that, gang. They are saying that we can't even contemplate these ideas, these positions. And they're doing that by depriving us of the tools that we need to actually do that. It's not just an attack on free speech, the culture of free speech. It's an attack on our minds. That's what people like French and Goldberg don't understand, because they don't want to understand, because people like French and Goldberg, they are state-sponsored opposition. These are the state-sponsored conservatives who don't want to rock the apple cart because they depend on the tyranny that is being built around us to actually keep their jobs. Don't believe them when they say that this isn't a matter of free speech. It most definitely is. And it is an attack on our free speech and our ability to associate and our ability to reason together. That is story number 2.